Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmerie. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the Relevant Radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Career women, housewives, both, many women today are trying to figure out how to juggle it all when we're told we can have it all, but then when we try to have it all, we don't quite feel like it's working. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio, and we're going to be talking about a hot topic, everything from daycare to working moms, and where the church's teaching and the wisdom of the saints can guide us in discerning in our own families to live our vocation to the fullness. Everything from the vocation of the fact that we're made male or female to our state in life, and also considering those great gifts of contribution we may have to offer to the world as women. So stay with me as we'll take a deep dive into a rather controversial topic, and I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. Numbers 1-888-914-9149. You can also comment sharing your question now on my Instagram. Just follow me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. Would love to take your question or comment. Joining me now is the Chief Growth Officer for Young Catholic Professionals. Phil Mauro is working on the national expansion efforts of the Young Catholic Professionals Group, which, by the way, has a national conference in Frisco, Texas, coming up at the end of April, going into May. And perhaps you find yourself working in a field, whether it's secular or religious, but wanting to bring your Catholic principles, to live your Catholic faith in any environment you find yourself in. Well, doing that every day and helping to guide young Catholics through this as a Young Catholic Professionals organization. Phil Mauro, welcome to Trending.
Thanks so much.
I'm really excited to hear about your Young Catholic Professionals Conference coming up. Can you share with us a little bit about it and who is the ideal person to attend?
Absolutely. So our target audience is age 20 to 40, but we also have a lot of older Catholics attending as mentors, just sharing their experience with younger folks.
Fantastic. So go ahead.
Oh, yes. And so Frisco is actually near Dallas. If you're not from Texas, and I am not, and wondering where that is, but it's in Dallas, Texas from April 29th to May 1st. Our theme this year is Thy Will Be Done. It's based on a book by St. Alphonsus Liguori. And we'll have more than 500 folks there with great liturgies, awesome speakers, professional development, fellowship, and, of course, the Holy Spirit.
Can you share with us a little bit about the professional development? Because I find many young Catholics today find themselves often floundering or searching direction. Here they have their faith, and their faith is changing their lives. They want to get involved with something such as Young Catholic Professionals, but often many even find themselves considering leaving their secular career to do something in the church. And so do you help people navigate and understand their gifts and how their gifts can be valued and honored even in the secular dimension as well?
Absolutely. I would say that most of our audience does work in secular professions, but YCP is open to all. We certainly have some that have bounced back and forth, but a lot of our mentors, although we have some that have worked for the church, most of them are folks that have worked in secular professions, and they're able to give that advice on how to balance and integrate faith and work, and then also the very practical professional development and career development advice as well.
Tell me a little bit about the professional development. What would someone attending see during this course in the program?
Sure. Well, our focus is actually mostly spiritual, but we do have some breakout sessions on, project management, topics like leadership, managing personnel, just navigating your career, change management, etc. So franchise management. A lot of these skills are just very much at the heart of what our board members and mentors have done throughout their careers. And they absolutely, during these sessions, will pass on their knowledge and their skills to our YCP conference attendees, as they do with our normal programming all across the nation.
You can learn more at youngcatholicprofessionals.org to sign up for their conference happening April 29th to May 1st. I actually was kidding around before the show because Christina Pineda, our celebrity and royal matchmaker here on Trending, was talking about how the Young Catholic Professionals Conference is a great place to possibly meet a like-minded single individual. Now, I'm sure you don't want to be branded that way, but can you share a little bit to the fact that people who are passionate about their faith and working in the secular or religious environment are meeting people of their same age interested in pursuing family life, just like maybe they're not finding in their home environment?
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a KPI that we actually do track. We have a ton of marriages that have come through YCP. There is a gala at the conference, so definitely an opportunity to mingle there. And I think really each of our chapters, as well as our national conference, because they're citywide, we pull people from all different parishes. We intentionally don't stick with a particular parish. We rotate our YCP events, and YCP really serves as a hub between different communities of Catholics. So it definitely helps connect groups and people that may not know each other, just to strengthen that overall network around the country and within particular cities. And that sure absolutely results in some connections that hopefully bear fruitful relationships, both of friendships and, of course, of marriages as well.
It's neat to see that even whether it be Catholic universities or even young Catholic professionals, that this is a metric that you are looking at, because what we're looking at is not just, hey, how can you be a professional, but how can you be an excellent Catholic? And so monitoring and seeing that you are seeing marriages and relationships develop, I think is important. And this is where I so often hear from people who are struggling in as a single, saying, I want to meet other like-minded individuals. And perhaps I wouldn't recommend just going to this conference to meet a spouse, but to meet people who will also help cultivate those types of relationships and skills and ultimately your faith. So can you share with us a little bit, Phil Mauro from Young Catholic Professionals is with us, can you share with us a little bit about this spiritual dimension of bringing your faith into the secular workforce?
Sure, absolutely. So a good core of our programming is based on exactly that. At the conference, we'll certainly have daily mass, and really our primary goal, you sort of alluded to the encourage community goal, but it's to foster Catholic identity. And one of the main ways to do that is to not compartmentalize your life and make sure that you're integrating your faith with your work. And whether it's simply acknowledging that we're all sharing in God's creative activity in our daily work, and that everything can be done for the glory of God and provides a value and a service to society, and can all be done to help others and to grow in your identity as a Catholic and grow in your identity within society, and to see that as a true vocation, no matter how mundane the task actually is.
Now, prior to working with Young Catholic Professionals, part of your career actually included 7 years as an Army officer. Can you share with me a little bit about maybe even an example where you were able to bring your religious principles into your career as an Army officer?
Sure. Well, I was 7 years of active duty, and then I served another 3 in the National Guard. And I think Catholicism helped me in the military for sure. It tends to go hand in hand with a very sort of regimented way of doing things. But I'll be honest with you, I really wasn't as practicing when I was in the Army. I didn't integrate it well, and I let the Army become more of my identity than my faith was. And that was a real error. And I think that especially today, a lot of corporations are intentionally seeking to fill a void of identity and get you to truly identify with your company as as your sort of identity, and maybe even your religion in some sense. And I think that's actually kind of a warning. And we want to make sure that although work is good and corporations provide a lot of positive benefit, they shouldn't really be replacements. Even if the thing is as good as the Army, or is kind of a vocation,
Mm-hmm.
it can sort of take you away from the faith. And that actually is what happened to me. So I'm sorry I don't have a great positive story, and I'll end on a note of caution. But on a positive side, I'll definitely say that my faith, growing up as a Catholic and going to Catholic school, did help me in the military as well. I just wish I had really embraced my identity more as a younger person.
It's fascinating that you're bringing up identity and how it's easy based on what company or what type of work you're doing, how we can take on that persona of this is how I identify. I remember some years ago, I was asking my mom something about someone she'd recently met. And I said, oh, well, what do they do? And there have been a number of cases where my mom says, oh, I don't know what that person does. That is for a living. And she said, I find that when we centralize this topic of what do you do, we tend to, in a certain respect, objectify a person and encourage an identity just with a career rather than getting to know them as a person. Yet we live in a culture that is so focused on what is your academic level, what is the degree you have, what are those
Mm-hmm.
letters behind your name, and what profession are you in. And so this is the fusion at that Young Catholic Professionals Networking Conference of helping us understand our identity isn't our job title, or our education status, but our identity is Catholic. And that may mean, and we're going to talk about this later, for women, that may mean we're in a career for a time, we leave, we come back. That may mean we're constantly having to juggle and choose a different type of career based on our family or our needs. And so, can you speak a little bit more to that identity challenge that is so challenging for us in our career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, like the Catholic identity should come first, and then your work is an offshoot of that. It's your vocation, which shouldn't be confused with your organization, right? Like if I have a vocation as a soldier or a management consultant, my identity would be Catholic, my vocation would be management consultant, and then, I would happen to work for, a company. Like I work for Booz Allen and I work for North Highland. And it has to be in that order to be rightly ordered. And if it were the opposite, where, but a company, it's in their interest to have it be the opposite way, right? They want to make a profit. They want you to work as much as possible to increase their profits and ask as little as possible. And to do that, they would rather your identity be for the company first and perhaps for the Catholic last. And I think that's the challenge, because all of the brand managers at all of these companies want that to be your identity. And so they want you to they create and use psychology to make that your identity. So you will work harder for the company and you will kind of put them and their profit at the center of your life. So it's very, very difficult, I think, to really navigate that and understand what they're trying to do. And even if, the company performs a great service, and again, I'm not saying the corporations are evil, you have to just guard against the incentive for them to make themselves the center of your life.
Yeah, and this is something that we're guilty of in the non-for-profit or for-profit world. I remember some years ago I was working for a company and I was giving a speech not associated with the company, and someone was so upset. Well, she didn't say that she worked for this particular place, and they were so offended that I didn't brand myself as working for this specific organization within the context of this speech. And I thought, well, do I belong to myself or do I belong to you? And of course, we should represent and be proud of the work we're doing. But I think that there's a balance, and this really touches on this entire feminist crisis that we're seeing for women battling this identity crisis of, well, am I a stay-at-home mom? Am I meant to be a career woman? And finding the true answer, which we're going to discuss that a little deeper today during our show. Can you have it all? Can you do both? But Phil, share with us where people can learn more about the Young Catholic Professionals Conference coming up at the end of this April.
Absolutely. So you can learn more at www.ycpconference.org or our main website, www.youngcatholicprofessionals.org. And I also just want to say, we opened our 28th chapter last Saturday in Fairfield County, Connecticut. If we do not have a chapter near you, we would probably like to. So, anyone interested in bringing a YCP chapter to their city can email expansion@youngcatholicprofessionals.org. And I'd love to talk to you about kind of building our network nationwide, expanding from 30 to 50 cities over the next 2 years, and really making sure that everyone has access to a great network of committed Catholics.
If you're looking for a young Catholic network, this is a great opportunity to find one by starting a chapter of young Catholic professionals in your area. Maybe you're not interested in going to a women's group, a men's group, or even a young adult group, but hey, talking about your career, having that as a bridge into discussing your faith might be an area where you feel more comfortable and interested in a type of person you might be interested in meeting. So check them out at youngcatholicprofessionals.org. We'll include a link in the podcast notes. And we'll also post a link on social media as well. But be sure to subscribe at relevantradio.com/trending where you can catch this episode. I'll be right back here on trending. That's been Phil Mauro from Young Catholic Professionals. Again, find them at youngcatholicprofessionals.org. But we're going to come back diving into a controversial topic: career women, housewife, or both. Can you have it all? How has feminism lied to women and confused us about our identity? We'll dive into this, but if you have a question or a comment, the number is 1-888-914-9149. You can also ask a question now on my Instagram. Just ask a question at the question box at Timmerie.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, so I want to dive into a very controversial and also what I would argue sensitive topic. And that has to do with everything from career status to motherhood to daycare to not daycare, in the animus and mom guilt and jealousy, hyperactive kids, all of what is going on behind the scenes surrounding motherhood, marriages, and the upbringing of children. I'm fascinated anytime you start to touch on the conversation of someone being a stay at home mom versus a career woman. The idea of the last really 50 years now is that women can have it all. Be freed from your bonds of fertility. Okay, sure. So you have the option of hormonal contraception and abortion to eliminate the child or to supposedly time the children as you please. Now, we could dive into the aftermath and impact of those things medically, psychologically, and interpersonally those things have had on women, but that's not what I want to focus on today. What I want to focus on is that we're seeing a culture with everything from mom guilt, mom wars between the working and the housewife, the lack of confidence that some moms experience when they're asked what they do and they're embarrassed to say, or defensive when they say they're a homemaker, the jealousy of working moms with regard to the time that non-working moms have to spend with their kids or make these delicious, perfect desserts every single day and food from scratch all the time, to the real challenges of how kids are coping and maintaining in the face of what we are told to do today as women. You go to high school, you go to college, you then get that degree in higher education, and then you enter into the workforce of your choice that you studied and worked years to obtain and maybe even suffered through enduring student loan debt to get there. I've said many times before, I think one of the greatest injustices to women over the last 50 years has been that we are lied to every day and we're told from very young age, middle school, high school, to go directly to the college track. Now, I'm all for women's education. I think it's important, but the way we are enduring student loan debt and playing experiments on our bodies with everything from hormonal contraception to high levels of anxiety and depression medication is unacceptable. We're overwhelmed. We're doing too much. Studies show this, whether it's a middle life woman, an elderly woman, or a young woman. We're being pulled in so many directions, being told that we can have it all while at the same time experiencing anxiety, depression, exhaustion, and much more. And so I want to take a deep dive going back, let's say even 40, 45 years. I want to share with you a story about a woman by the name of Susan Anderson. She was a television anchor making six figures. She quit her career to be home with her kids. Now, she was in the midst of a massive dilemma. She was in a career that required youth, beauty, competition, looks were everything. And for her to leave her career in her 20s and try to come back in her late 30s or 40s was basically a suicide when it came to her career. Now, her husband was willing and able to cut back on his work as an attorney, reduce some hours to be more present and helpful for the kids. But she tells a story of how deep down inside there was this primal feeling, touching on two important things. Yes, that her kids needed her more than her job was allowing, but two, that she needed them. This inspired her to absolutely leave everything to be with her kids at home. Now, I find this fascinating because you hear stories today of many people saying, specifically women, I wish I had more kids, or I wish I spent more time with my kids. Ironically, Barbara Walters is someone that is at the heart of this debate and has been for over 45 years, as she pioneered and really pushed for women to have greater access to government funded daycare so that they could be in the workforce. In fact, in 1986, an ABC 2020 episode titled When Mom Has to Work, Barbara Walters featured not only the fact that there needed to be more government funded daycare programs, but she claimed that most families needed two paychecks. And so she tried to tell the story and evoke sympathy for moms who were trying to have it all with having a career, were trying to help provide it all by also having a career and bringing in a paycheck, but were absolutely exhausted, stressed, and overwhelmed. And she tells a story of how these families are doing. And she shares a story of three families. Now, what's fascinating, before I go any deeper, she really told a major lie in that 1986 2020 episode when moms had to work. She made the claim that families had to live on two paychecks. But the reality is that back in the mid 1980s, even then, over half of moms with children under the age of 2 were full time homemakers. And she never shared some of these facts and the truths of the reality of women choosing of their own volition to leave the workforce, to be with their kids, to be there for fundamental years. So first of all, she lies in this episode trying to convince people that two incomes are necessary to live. And ironically, the three families that she ends up interviewing are families with quite high incomes, unnecessarily high incomes for the average human being. But these three families that she follows, here's some of what we see from the mom, the husband, and the kids. The mom is working a full time job, but also every single day is doing 7 hours of domestic work at home. She's exhausted, she's stressed, she's at her limit. The husband is leaning in, as we're told as women that today in the 21st century that our husband should do the equal amount of housework in order for us to work. But the reality is that no matter which way you slice it, it shows, studies show time and time again, that the hours just don't add up. It didn't add up in the 80s and it doesn't add up today. While mom works full time and does 7 hours of domestic work, the husband, who's also working for full time, then really only does an average of much less work. Not a criticism, just a fact. And this story from, again, the 1986 ABC Barbara Walters episode of 2020, When Mom Has to Work, in this case, the husband was doing 4 hours of domestic work, not the half that we are told as women in the 21st century that we must demand of our husbands because that's what's fair and right. In in reality, is everything perfectly divvied up, perfectly evened out? And where do we consider gifts, talents, thoughtfulness, attention to detail, and the differences between the sexes? That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But here's what's interesting. We saw that not only were husbands, yes, also doing extra work after their full time jobs, but the husbands also felt neglected. Say what you want, make fun of husbands for so called being needy, which is what the secular, radical feminist left likes to do when it comes to men. The reality is that we're human, and all humans are created for relationship. And the relationship of marriage is meant to be a relationship that cultivates, grows, and challenges one another. The husband should never feel neglected. And that's a good warning sign and reminder for us as women to reevaluate where we are at. And I think that this whole conversation, as we continue on, because I think the theme here is getting to the bottom and diving into this crisis of career women, housewife, or both, can you have it all? That as women, as married couples, we have to constantly reevaluate, how are we doing? Where are we at? Is our family thriving? How are the individuals in our family succeeding? Are they succeeding? Are they suffering? And here's what was shown in the three families that were featured on this 2020 episode with Barbara Walters when she's showing when mom has to work. She's trying to evoke sympathy for the moms, but what we see is, yes, moms are exhausted, stressed, husbands feel neglected, but the kids are showing that they're being woken up far too early. They're on an unnatural schedule and they're making their way to daycare so that they can get there before school, before work, before mom and dad go to work. In fact, even back in the mid 80s, on that very episode, one of the kids said, "Mommy, I wish you didn't have to work. You're always so tired." This is a line that I could say I've seen repeated from many children today, many children whom I know, and perhaps even at times not just from moms who work hearing their kids say this, but even moms who just are always finding something to occupy their time, overly focusing on the cleaning, overly focusing on volunteering, overly focusing on socializing, overly focusing on social media or catching up with the news. We can't just say that this is something a kid's experiencing whose mom is working. But here's what's fascinating. Barbara Walters herself, who has personified and emphasized the career woman, who has spoken and advocated for government funding for programs that make it so that moms can work more and kids are paid for by the government. Well, Barbara Walters, over 30 years later, toward the end of her life, ends up saying, "I wish I had more kids." Wishes she spent more time with her one child. See, this is the crisis. This is the dichotomy that we're living in as a culture today. And it has to do with identity, especially for women. And this identity crisis has gone so deep, not just for women, it's impacted our children. And this is truly a part of this transgender craze we're seeing kids struggle with. We no longer know who we are. And I want to dive today into the depths of what it means to be a woman and whether or not motherhood is a part of that, where the church stands, and what we can learn to constantly reevaluate, to be challenged by our faith when it comes to our career and how we raise our kids. You see, I think that that dichotomy is always there for men and women, but very poignantly for women today. The question is, do you live to work or do you work to live? It's a very important question. And whether you're male or female, it's a question we should all ask ourselves and reevaluate from time to time. Do I live to work or do I work to live? And it's one of those questions you kind of have to scratch your head to break it down for a moment. And you're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Let's talk about this. If you live to work, what that means is you're living for your work. And when you live for your work, when your mind is constantly, we talked about the preoccupation of the mind, the imagination, what we think about yesterday here during our weekly happy hour. I hope you listened to that episode. Fascinating, riveting conversation with Father Robert Spitzer. But we saw in that conversation that what we think about, what we occupy our minds with, are essentially that is, we then are influenced by what we're constantly thinking about. And that ultimately leads to action, identity, and emotion. So when we live to work, our work becomes our identity. In the 21st century, we as women have been told, well, the first question you ask when you meet someone is, well, what do you do? Abashedly, poor women who are housewives and work from home feel uncomfortable and awkward and at times ashamed for saying, "I'm a housewife," or they boldly say it or defensively say it. But often they feel embarrassed for saying it. Why? Because our culture has focused so hard on saying that what you do as a wife and a mother is not important, and you should see your value in what title or degree you hold. And that's a problem because that's a culture that says, I live to work. I live for my work, and my work has become my identity. Our proper approach as people of faith, understanding the depths of the human person, the potential, and the final end and orientation of who we are, we should have a different perspective. And that perspective is that we work to live. That we work, we do the things necessary to survive, to thrive, to care for ourselves and those entrusted to our care. And that's what gives us meaning. That's what gives you a means to live and thrive as a human being. That you're thriving because you're meeting what is necessary of you. You know, from the dawn of creation, Adam and Eve in the garden, if we read those first couple books of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, those first two chapters, we see from the very beginning the human person is called to work, to till and keep and cultivate the land for food, for beauty, for providing for one another. But nowhere did it say that this is the extent of your existence. This is the purpose of your creation. It's a responsibility, not an identity. And see, motherhood is at the heart of this crisis. This crisis in the next generation that is starting to raise children. This crisis is the same crisis that was occurring back in the 1980s of women stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, tired, because they are told you can have it all, you can do it all, you must. Who are lied to and being told that you have to have two paychecks. I, I see it all the time. We overspend as a culture. We live in a culture of materialism. We have to have the car we want, rather than driving the car that works. We have to buy new cars rather than used cars. We have to have the house that has the swimming pool. We have to have brand new clothes rather than at times, perhaps, enduring our older clothes that are just fine, or even shopping for used clothes at times. You see, the feminist movement have all overemphasized education and career as our identity as human beings rather than the relational dimension of the human person. This has led us as women to become cogs in a machine, the cogs in the machine of progress, of productivity for organizations, as we were discussing earlier here on Trending with Phil Mauro from Young Catholic Professionals. It's so easy for who you work for, whatever that corporation is, to become your identity. And you forget you're Catholic and meant to bring Catholic principles, a Catholic approach to the human person into whatever secular or religious arena you find yourselves in. See, we've been told as women we can have it all, but that's not true. That goes against the very basic dimension of what it means to be human. The fact that we as human beings are called to what Jesus Christ lived on the cross, life-giving, self-giving love. And that fullness of his identity, that fullness of his sacrifice is the fullness of the conversion of mind, body, and heart you and I are called to as well. But instead, we're living in a dichotomy of the human person with lone crises for women and men, forced attitudes of the necessity of two paychecks. Again, this lie that we can have it all and we're just becoming cogs in a machine of progress, moving like Energizer bunnies until at one point our batteries die. We shut off. And maybe that wall is suddenly in need for antidepressants, anxiety medication. Maybe that wall is a physical illness, a mental illness. Maybe that wall, it can be any number of things. Maybe it can be the damage to the relationships you have because you're not able to cultivate them. That is not woman. That is not pro woman. So, the basic dimension of the human person is human flourishment, joy, fulfillment. We're called as relational human beings to invest in other human beings, whether it be the workplace or family. The church ethics is to understand the investment of the human person. If you dive into professional ethics, business ethics, the Catholic Church emphasizes that the greatest asset that any company or organization can have is specifically its people, and that that asset is worth investing in above all else. That we see the value, that we don't just see a person whose job is X, Y, and Z, and that's what they're to complete. And that's how we judge a human being. But where we see there's a person, yes, who's completing a job, but might have a good day or a bad day, might have a challenging conversation, might have things happening at home, might be, in the midst of not having gotten enough sleep. And there's so many things that we can discuss that it's so important that we're understanding the secular world has dominated how we view ourselves as women, how we view ourselves as human beings, and how we view our interactions as parents. And so, what I want to come back here today on trending discussing is the importance of mothers, the depths of just scratching the surface of the depths of the Catholic Church's teaching, understanding how profound women are in the home, in society, toward our husbands, and the gift that we have, the many gifts we have to offer as women. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. If you'd like to share a comment or a question, the number is 1-888-914-9149, or you can comment with a question now on my Instagram at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. We're continuing to dive into the topic of career women, housewives, or both. Can you have it all?
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
We are diving into the depths of a great debate in our culture, one that has been fueled by the radical feminist movement that has thrown out the idea of motherhood and has encouraged and oriented women to identity rooted in our career, our education level, rather than an identity as human beings created in God's image with a purpose. And part of that purpose and gift is motherhood, whether or not you have children. And we're going to dive into that, understanding what the church teaches about the great gift of women. Calling now is Adrian from Austin, Texas, commenting about the topic of pressure women face today. Adrian, what's your comment today for trending? We will come back to Adrian in just a moment. So, what I want to discuss today, because I think that diving into this is so important, is understanding the need that kids need their moms. And this is so important. Kids need their moms, and we don't talk about this enough. It's interesting. There's a story written back in the 1980s, a Piece of My Mind article in the Journal of American Medical Association. It was written by a surgeon, Dr. Margaret Levy. And Dr. Margaret Levy wrote about how she was naive enough to believe that she could do everything she wanted to do. As she was in the midst of medical school, coming out of medical school, she believed that, in other words, she could have it all, be a mom, be a surgeon, maintain everything perfectly, raising that family and having a rewarding career. But she says in this Piece of My Mind article in the Journal of the American Medical Association, she said, "Let me tell you once for all, this is neither physically or psychologically possible. Take my word for it." She then goes on to say, whatever arrangement the career woman makes for her children, she says, call it anything but mom. You see, Dr. Margaret Levy said that as a surgeon, she wanted to raise her kids too, and she didn't want her kids to go to daycare. She saw some of the negative elements and dimensions of daycare on children. And so what her and her husband worked out to do, because she made more money, was her husband stayed home for 8 years raising the children. And In hindsight, and even in the midst of it, she is not and was not happy with this. And this is back in the 80s. She said she was envious of her husband's time with the kids, and there was just this lack of satisfaction. And she ends up going on to say, and I find her words so fascinating because she talks about this appeal to liberation that so many women are told that this is what it takes to, have it all, and we need hormonal contraception, we need abortion, we need daycare, we need government funded programs. All of that said, she actually speaks to the comparison between herself and her grandmother's generation. And I find it absolutely fascinating. She said, I am not a liberated woman. She said, I am incarcerated in a world and lifestyle far more complex and complicated than my great grandmother, raising her 11 children in an apartment in the Bronx, could have imagined. What she's saying is people would criticize her great grandmother, who again raised 11 children in an apartment in the Bronx, and say that she's not liberated. But what she's saying is that she herself, a parent, a surgeon, a working woman, a professional, is the one that's not liberated. She's incarcerated, as she says, in a world and lifestyle far more complex. That lifestyle that we were lied to about as women back in the 1980s in various television shows and programs and campaigns, such as 2020 and Barbara Walters claiming that all families need 2 paychecks, claiming that that is what gives us as women a sense of worth. You see, Dr. Margaret Levy's testimony is profound because what she's touching on is the fact that women have been lied to. They've been lied to even about the benefits of daycare. And I'm not having this discussion because if you are finding yourself as a working parent or a parent with kids in daycare, that we should feel horrible about ourselves and we're doing everything wrong. No, the conversation that must occur is we always, as parents, as people of faith, we are inspired by the fact that we have an incredible sacrament called reconciliation, confession, and that we are always called to be humble before our Lord, pondering who we are as human beings, what we are created for, what our mission responsibility is. This is why when we go to confession, we're supposed to say our state in life. So if you're married, single, a priest, a religious sister, we're actually supposed to share that within the context of marriage to better help the priest acting in persona Christi, acting in the person of Christ, yes, to not just forgive our sins, but help challenge and dive to the depths of who we are and what our vocation is. And that's why confession is so important. That is why reevaluation of where we are and how the individuals in our family are thriving is so important. And so here's what we were lied to over 50 years ago. Back in the 70s, we were told that the daycare generally benefits children. Professor Jay Belsky from Pennsylvania State University convinced many pediatricians, many working individuals, that this was generally beneficial for kids. That is daycare. And then years later, in the mid to late 80s, he changed his mind. And at the American Academy of Pediatricians meeting, shares this. But not a lot of people talk about it. Now, he had a national stage. In fact, it ended up in the national news, but it was just a news blip and it went away. At that point, it had already been written into the culture. Well, here's the deal. And I think it's so important that we understand, why are moms important? Why should we ignore the lie about daycare, the lie about fulfillment only in a career and education? Because why, yes, women are a gift to society and we have so much to offer: the home life, the work environment, various nonprofits, various ministries. The culture has encouraged us and pulled us out of an understanding, a fundamental understanding of who we are. That is what our identity is. We've been ushered into a culture of a workforce identity as women, who, not who we are, but what we do. We've been detached from the natural maternal tenderness we have. We've been told, well, it's easier to put your kids in daycare. It's easier because also it might even be argued that they get it better because they're getting more attention than perhaps you as an individual would have given your child. You're getting experts in various levels of education and ideas. But the problem is that this has struck at the core of who we are as women. It's an identity crisis for women. It's fascinating. There's a reason why last week before an international stage, an international audience. Potentially our next Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, when asked what a woman is, couldn't and wouldn't she refuse to answer, ignoring the reality of XX chromosomes, functional anatomy, and the potency for motherhood. No, I said potency. This is why we have to talk about our identity as women. And that always comes back to a relational dimension. We are born into this world as daughters. We have sisters. We have the potential and potency as a bride, a mother. There's a book written by Dr. Carrie Gress a couple years ago called The Anti-Mary Exposed, touching on what is truly a thing in our culture, and that is toxic feminism. And she discusses how radical feminism today has attacked all dimensions of womanhood. It's attacked virginity, it's attacked being a bride, it's attacked being a mother. Everything that the Christian understanding of the human person as a woman is, radical feminism has attacked. And she gives the title The Anti-Mary Exposed because it shows that who and what, the pinnacle of creation, one of the most excellent human beings in all of creation, that is the Blessed Virgin Mary, that the culture has rejected everything she was, from wife to mother to virgin to a person of faith. And this rejection is what seemingly makes it easy for us to detach from our children and justify enjoyable pursuits of career, higher levels of income. You see, the value of who we are as women has been utterly and completely misplaced. The value of unconditional love, security, confidence, healthy attitudes, relationships with food, clothes, and boys that women and mothers help to entrust to their children. We help in developing all these things, again, unconditional love in our children, security, confidence, trust. And might I just say this one more time, teaching them by our modeling healthy attitudes and relationships with food, clothes, boys. There's so many women today struggle with weight. And we know studies show that a lot of this has to do with stress because we're trying to have it all, we're trying to do it all, and we don't have time to eat right. We don't have time to cook right, or we're spending more money trying to do so, and then we're rushing when we eat. But if we're to slow down, we'd be able to help a better teach these things that are so important about health and relationships with the created goods. We can help teach what being a woman is like. And yes, we can do that in small spurts of time, morning and evening on the weekends. But to help raise your kids, it's so important. And I remind myself every day. I was talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about how a baby girl is, 15 months, screaming because she's hungry, screaming because she's teething. And she said, Timmerie, just stay present. Stay present. Being present to your kids is one of the best things you can do. Here is a true faith-filled Christian psychologist teaching Christian principles in the context of psychology, and I think that's so important. Women are told there's going to be a learning gap if you don't send your child to preschool or daycare. Those are lies fabricated as talking points to convince us as women that we're doing less than if we don't follow a socialist mindset of having someone else raise our kids rather than us bearing the image of motherhood, of womanhood, of fatherhood to our own children. There are things that only we can do as women. In the Apostolic Exhortation, Complete My Joy by Bishop Olmsted, he said, Dear daughters in Christ, the worth, dignity, and genius inherent to you is irreplaceable in your family. Only you can offer the motherly love your children need. And he encourages a challenge for couples to reevaluate and consider how we can make remarkable sacrifices in our homes for our children. Have you joined us for a weekly Gentleman's Hour on Wednesday? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. We're going to dive into the depths of what it means to be a man and St. Joseph as that model. As per usual, we'll take your questions, gentlemen questions you otherwise wouldn't necessarily ask your mom or your sister. but you like a faith-filled response to. So join me Wednesday for our Gentleman's Hour, 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.